covering the political landscape along the I-4 corridor. Welcome to Political Connections.
Welcome to Political Connections. I'm Ibeth Brusual. In any other year, you know, this particular race might not even register among voters, but when you toss around the name Casey Anthony, all bets are off, of course. We're talking about the race for state attorney in the 9th Circuit and the Democratic race between the incumbent, and that would be Lawson Lamar, Jeff Ashton, and this week's guest, Ryan Williams. News 13's Christine Webb had a chance to sit down with Ryan Williams one-on-one earlier this week to talk about his campaign for state attorney.
Joining us now is Ryan Williams. Thanks for coming in today.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start out with your resume. You're born in Orlando, grew up in Claremont, calling Central Florida home for your entire life. UNC School of Law, and right out of school, you went to the office of the state attorney, and that's where you've been for your career. So talk about your career path and where it's taken you up to this point.
Well, I went to the state attorney's office because I felt like if you want to serve your community, that's a great place to go. Other than the military, I feel like prosecuting is the best way to make sure you protect your community with the skills that I have. And I was promoted very quickly through the office of the state attorney. In fact, I skipped the juvenile rotation entirely when I went through the office, and I ended up in the sex crimes unit before I left.
So now you're running against incumbent Lawson Lamar,
that's right,
who's been in office for over 20 years. What's the reason that you want to take on your boss?
It's not so much wanting to take on your boss as seeing a need in the community that needed to be filled, and no one else was willing to do it. The state attorney's office, as we've seen recently, when there are mistakes made or failures, it has real consequences for our community's safety and for individuals.
Specifically?
The Katie Way murders is what I'm referring to specifically, though that's not the only instance. Anytime a person is able to walk away from a crime, a dangerous individual, from a prosecution and be back on the streets too quickly, it presents a danger to everyone.
Let's talk about the other big name in the race, that of course being Jeff Ashton, who we saw basically on TV almost every day with the Casey Anthony trial. It's one thing to run against your boss, but now you're running against someone in the same office, someone who obviously has a bit of notoriety, name recognition. So do you see that as a hurdle to clear for your campaign? How do you manage that?
I think there's a clear distinction between myself and Jeff. I think most people don't know Jeff was in the office before Lawson was. So I think it's a different generation of leadership that we're trying to present forward for the people in the community to make sure that we're all safe. Obviously, notoriety is always interesting when it comes to politics, and in particular his notoriety with the Casey Anthony case. But I feel comfortable that voters are going to be able to see the difference between Jeff and Lawson and then myself.
So how do you get that name recognition? How do you come from behind and say, okay, I'm a strong contender as well?
You have to make sure there's a stark difference. You have to make sure you present a path forward for the community that people understand. That's why I have my community prosecution program. I know I'm the only candidate who has put forth a solution to a problem that nobody else is talking about.
Let's talk about would you say, some of the biggest issues that are facing the state attorney's office, and kind of how would you go about fixing them?
The number one issue is we have no presence in the community. The first question I often get when I'm out in the community is, are you running against Pam Bondi? And people don't know what the state attorney's office does or what our role is. And that's a failure on our part, on the state attorney's part, to let people know that we're there. Let them know what decisions we make and how we work with law enforcement. You know, people think crime and they think officers. Officers respond and lock them up. If the state attorney doesn't do his job, people are released back on the streets just as quickly as they're arrested.
So what do you feel the role is of the state attorney?
I view the role of the state attorney as going out and being more proactive. We need to get involved in our community. We need to sit down with business leaders and community leaders and find out what their issues with crime are. Every community has a different crime or different type of crime that affects their particular area. Some it's residential burglaries. Some areas it's violent crime. Some areas it's drug and drug addiction. And one size fits all doesn't work, and that's why I feel like we have low conviction rates and the high crime that we do.
Let's talk about one of the initiatives that you've listed on your website called Go Vertical. What is that? What does it mean?
One of the reasons that we have such a low conviction rate in Orange County is because we file cases we can't prove. And that's a function of the way that cases come in from law enforcement and they go to a paralegal or an attorney who makes the decision. That case is then sent on to somebody else who's responsible for trying it. The people who make those decisions don't actually go in the courtroom and try cases, so there's a lack of accountability. It's just like any other job. If you know you're not responsible for it at the back end, you're more likely to file something that somebody else may not be comfortable handling.
Let's talk about the time that you've been in the state attorney's office. How have you seen crime changed and how it's handled?
It's more specifically the way the public views us. You know, I once did a case where the jury was in the back arguing for 5 hours over whether or not a law enforcement officer, actually 3, were lying. Now, people don't trust law enforcement, they don't trust prosecutors. Every night they go home and they see violent crime on TV, they hear stories about people being wrongfully convicted. We have to regain the trust of the people in the community to let them know that we are filing cases, we are making the good decisions.
So how do you do that, though? How do you regain the public's trust? How do you change that image?
You have to get back in the community. You have to let people know what we're doing and that we're there not just to lock them up, but to make our community safer. We also have to be more successful in the courtroom. You know, one of the things that's a real problem for the state attorney's office and prosecutors are witnesses who are unwilling to come forward. Well, when you're convicting people at 49% rate at trial, and you know that if a person gets off on a crime and comes out and is going to be your neighbor afterwards, you don't have much incentive to go forward and to testify in court. So we need to do a better job prosecuting the cases we have to give confidence to our community.
When you say go into the community specifically, what do you hope to achieve?
My Community Prosecution Initiative would assign prosecutors to geographic areas of the community. They would work with law enforcement and be responsible for prosecuting every criminal case in that specific area. That allows them to identify the bad actors, to go to pastors in churches and say, what are your issues and who are the people dealing the drugs? And when we have one-to-one interaction like that, in cooperation with law enforcement, because it takes them too, that will allow people to start to understand that we're there for them, not just to lock them up.
More with Democratic candidate for State Attorney Ryan Williams when Political Connections returns right after this quick break. Stay with us.